What's up, everybody? Hope is having a good day today. And I'm going to do my describe list sometime like after this video. So I'm going to check that out. Go ahead, like in this. I'll probably do it after, like maybe around 12:30 ish, or depending how long this video is going to be. So, and I'll do it live so anyone could join, and whoever joins that, they could watch. But I was everyone's having a good day, and I do have my subscribe list in this binder who just got to me this month, or from the last time I did a recording, a live, have it all in this binder. So, and I don't only have the subscribers on there. I also have my movie reviews, so I can know what reviews I already have done. So, they're all in there. I still need to do some more, but yeah. Let's get into this video. Let's see what the hell this family had. And I'm very kind of worried what they did. The most terrifying family you've never heard of. Okay, let's just find out because I thought the Texas Chainsaw family was a terrifying family, but I guess I'm wrong.
And their heinous ritual that they admitted to performing. This episode is extremely graphic and very upsetting, so viewer discretion is advised. But before we get into today's story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload 2 or 3 times every week. So if that's of interest to you, please sneak into the like button's house and steal the glass plate inside of their microwave. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. All right, let's get into today's story.
Me killing hour? Okay.
In the early 1950s, Harold Alexander, who was a young stonemason living in Hamburg, Germany, came in contact with an old man named George Reel. George was the leader of a small religious group called the Lorber Society. This group, which never had a large membership at any point in their short history, was rooted in the Christian faith, but their views were far more extreme than the average Christian congregation. For example, many Christians believe in the concept of self-denial, which in layman's terms means to deny oneself some personal human pleasures, like certain sexual practices or the overindulgence of food or drinking, and all of this is done to gain favor with God. But George and the other members of the Lorber Society took this concept of self-denial to the extreme. They practiced it so aggressively and so literally that nobody in the society could really have a life of their own. All they could do to adhere to their society's very strict rules was to worship God 24/7. In addition to their very severe lifestyles, members of the Lorber Society also believed that anybody outside of their small society was basically evil. So Harold meets George. It's unclear exactly how he meets George, but he does, and immediately Harold is blown away by George. He thinks he's totally incredible, he's so charismatic, and apparently George felt equally highly about Harold. And so right away they have this friendship, they strike up, and Harold and his wife Dragma, they end up joining the Lorber Society, and they completely give themselves over to this very intense lifestyle, and they listen to everything George tells them to do. And then very quickly after Harold and his wife had joined this society, their leader George became very ill, and it became clear he was going to die soon. When George was on his deathbed, Harold went to visit him, and after speaking with him privately in this room, Harold emerges and he tells his wife that George has told him that he is going to be the next leader of the Lorber Society once George passes away. And so his wife accepts this, as does the rest of the society members, and then after George actually does die, everyone in the society just turns towards Harold and begins listening to him and following him. It's worth noting that we don't know for sure if George really did tell Harold that he was going to be the next leader of the Lorber Society, or if Harold just made that up because he knew George was going to die soon and he could kind of get away with stealing that title. Over the next few years that Harold was in charge of the Lorber Society, he began introducing a new concept to the members. He would continuously tell them that they needed to be ready for when the next prophet of God returned to the earth. Harold told his members that when this happened, 1, Harold would know immediately and he would tell them, and 2, whatever this prophet wanted, no matter how confusing or crazy or terrible, they had to do it without question because this was God's will. In 1953, so roughly a year or two after Harold has taken over the Lorber Society, he and his wife, Drogma, have their second child. It's their first boy, and they name him Frank, and as soon as this child is born, Harold looks at him and determines that this boy, his son, is the prophet they have all been waiting for. And so he tells his wife and he tells the members of the Lorber Society that his son, Frank, is the prophet of God, and everyone across the board completely accepts it. As the prophet, Frank, grew up, he was shamelessly worshipped and waited on 24/7 by the members of the Lorber Society and his own family. And so naturally, this had a profound impact on the way Frank thought and how he behaved. By the time Frank was at the age of grade school children, he fully believed that he was the prophet of God, and he began using that authority to kind of boss his family around more than he really needed to, especially his 3 sisters and his mother. But no one ever intervened because, again, this is the prophet of God and he can do whatever he wants. When Frank turned 16, he started thinking about girls and sex, but he was conflicted because he had been taught everybody outside of this society he was a part of were evil. And so he didn't want to pollute himself by having sex with these evil women. And so he went to his father and told him that he wants to start having sex with his mother and his sisters in order to stay pure. And his father, Harold, not only embraced the idea, he encouraged it. And in fact, he would often join in with his son during the sexual intercourse.
There's way worse than the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Fuck. That's fucked up. I don't even know what. There's way worse than the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Fuck. This is way worse than the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I don't even know what. I don't even know what to say about this shit. Oh my god. You're supposed to be like a Christian, like a Christian person. This is way worse than the Texas. That's fucked up right there. Chainsaw Massacre. Way worse. Okay, that's fucked up right there. Like, you're supposed to be like a Christian, like a Christian person. You're doing this shit. Like, nah, bitch, that's fucked up right there. You're having sex with your mother, your sister, and your. That's fucked up. You're watching it. Guys, like looking. Bitch, fuck you. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, but I had to say that. You like all crazy looking, like crazy. Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you very much. This video.
As for the 4 Alexander women, they completely accepted their new roles as sexual objects because they believed by doing whatever Frank the prophet wanted, they were serving God. Eventually, one of these sisters began talking to some of her very few friends at school about how
I don't think God intended that to happen. Or wanted that to happen.
She was kind of jealous of her other sisters for all the attention they were getting from Frank. And so the friends kind of picked up on this strange relationship between the siblings, and before long, rumors had started about there being some incestuous relations inside of this family, and those rumors eventually made their way to the parents of students, and then from the parents, that made its way to the police, and before long, Harold had discovered that the Hamburg police were about to launch an investigation into his family. And at the same time, Harold also discovered that members of the Lorber Society, they had heard about these incest rumors as well, and they had their own suspicions already, and they were not on board with incest. And so they were very clearly starting to distance themselves from Harold and his family. And so it was pretty clear to Harold that the writing was on the wall. He and his family were no longer welcome in Hamburg. And so he goes to the Lorber Society and kind of retires and says, I'm leaving. You need to find yourself a new leader of this society. Society, and then he and his family completely broke ties with the Lorber Society. They left Hamburg and fled south to Santa Cruz, which is a city on the Canary Islands in Spain. And so they settle into this little apartment inside of this busy city, and very quickly they fell back into their old routines of constantly worshiping Frank, the prophet of God, despite the fact that they were no longer affiliated with the Lorber Society, and so their actions were now being driven by their own personal belief system. 10 months later, on December 22nd, 1970, a wealthy doctor named Walter Trankler was at his villa, which was located not far from where the Alexanders lived, when he heard a knock at his front door. When he opened the front door, he saw there were these two men who he didn't recognize, who were covered head to toe in what looked like mud, and at first he was totally taken aback by their appearance and almost wanted to just shut the door. But in order to be polite, he kept the door slightly open and said, hey, how can I help you guys? And the two men would introduce themselves as Harold and Frank Alexander, and they were there to speak with one of their family members, Sabine. Sabine was one of Frank's two younger sisters, and she worked for the doctor as a housemaid. And so the doctor, he didn't know any of Sabine's family members, so he just kind of took their request at face value and said, hold on, let me go get her. And so he leaves the front door, he goes into the kitchen, and he finds Sabine, this 15-year-old girl, and he tells her that your father and your brother are waiting for you outside, they want to talk to you. And so Sabine, without saying a word, puts her knife and the food down, she walks out of the kitchen with the doctor, and as they're walking towards the front door, the doctor stops about 10 or 15 feet away from the front door to kind of allow Sabine to walk up and have a semi-private conversation with her relatives, although they're still inside of his house, so he didn't want to go too far. And so the doctor is standing maybe 15 feet away, wondering if he should just turn around or maybe just go into the other room to let them speak, when he overhears the father, Harold, say something truly horrific to his daughter. It was so shocking that the doctor stopped what he was doing, turned, and looked directly at Sabine to see how she was going to react to what she just heard. But to the doctor's absolute shock, Sabine didn't break down and start crying or start screaming out in pain or anguish. Instead, she reached out and grabbed her father's muddy hand and pressed it to her cheek and said, "I'm sure you did what was necessary." And then the two embraced. The doctor stood there totally shocked, staring at these people, wondering what the heck they're doing, why are they here, what are they talking about, is this really happening? And then he just kind of blurts out, "Hey, I'll be right back, stay right there." And then the doctor turned around and darted out of the front hall into another room where he barricaded himself inside, and then he called the police. When the police showed up just a few minutes later, they rolled into the front lot, and they saw Harold, Frank, and Sabine were still just casually standing in the front doorway of the doctor's villa, seemingly not really trying to go anywhere or do anything. And so the police get out of their car, they walk up to the trio, and they say, what's going on? What are you doing here? And Harold, very calmly and casually, tells one of the officers the same horrible thing that the doctor overheard him saying to Sabine. Except this time, Harold specified to the officers where this horrible thing took place. He said it happened inside of their apartment. The police were shocked at Harold's candidness and the fact that his two kids who were standing right next to him and they're hearing what their father is saying. They too are just totally detached and very calm, as if nothing their father is saying is having any effect on them. It's just totally business as usual. And so the police asked Harold to repeat the story a few times to make sure they were hearing him correctly, and then they just arrested Harold and his two kids. After the three Alexanders were brought to the police station, 3 other police officers were sent over to the Alexanders' apartment in Santa Cruz to see if what Harold had said was actually true. And when these officers opened the front door to that apartment, they immediately could tell it was all true. The following is the story of what happened inside of that apartment based on the testimony given by Frank and Harold. On December 21st, 1970, so that's one day before Frank and Harold arrived on the doorstep of the doctor's villa, the father and son were home in their apartment with the mother, Dragma, as well as 2 of the 3 sisters. It was 18-year-old Marina and 15-year-old Petra. The other sister, Sabine, she was over at the doctor's villa. She was staying with him for a couple of days while she worked there. At some point that afternoon, Dragma and Harold left the living room and went into one of the bedrooms to lie down and take a nap. And after they lie down, Frank, for some reason, gets up from the living room and walks into the bedroom and sits down on the edge of the bed and just stares down at his mother. And when his mother rolls over and looks up at her son, Frank would later tell police that the look she gave him was suggestive and it was offensive to Frank, and he believed she was not permitted to look at him that way. And so in this moment that she's looking at him, he said he instinctively knew that the killing hour was upon them. The killing hour was not a Lorber Society concept. It was something that Frank and most likely Harold had come up with, and the rest of the family, the mother and the three sisters, had totally accepted. According to Frank and Harold, women were unpure, and the only way to purify them, i.e. send them to heaven and not hell, was to murder them. And so it was just fundamentally understood in the Alexander household that at some
Okay. That gave me a headache right there. I should know that's true. That did actually gave me a headache just listening to what. It may not look like I'm really paying attention, but I could hear very good. Not very good, but you get what I mean. I heard everything what they're going on, what they're saying. But everything that made my head, that all what the family did, it made my head hurt. Really bad. Not really bad, but it made my head hurt.
At some point, Frank was going to declare that the killing hour was upon them, and when that happened, all the women in the household were told to stop what they were doing and wait for Frank to sacrifice them. Meaning, wait for Frank to ritualistically kill them. So after Frank has seen this offensive look on his mother's face, he now feels like the killing hour is upon them, and so he literally announces it to his mother and to his father, who's right next to her, and then Frank grabs a nearby wooden coat hanger and strikes his mother on the top of her head. Now, his mother, she's heard that the killing hour is upon them, and he's starting to beat her, and so what does she do? She follows the rules. She flips herself over onto her stomach, puts her hands down by her side, and lays flat and still so Frank can more easily kill her. And so Frank begins wailing on the back of his mother's head with this wooden coat hanger, while his father, Harold, excitedly leaps out of the bed, doesn't try to stop what's going on. He runs into the living room, and he begins very enthusiastically playing the organ. An organ is like a piano that's played a lot of times inside of Christian churches. And so with all this commotion going on in the house, the other two sisters that were there, Marina and Petra, they come out of their bedrooms into the living room. They see their father playing the organ, and they look into the bedroom where they hear all this noise, and it's Frank murdering their mother. And they're looking at this happening. They're not doing anything. They're just staring at it. And then their father says to them, "The killing hour is upon us. You need to get ready." And so the girls, when they hear this, they know the rules. And so they stop watching this attack, and they make their way over to the center of the living room, and they sit down cross-legged, and they begin to patiently wait their turn. After a while, Frank stopped beating his mother, who was now unconscious or perhaps even dead, and he walked out of the bedroom into the living room, where he saw his father on the organ, and he saw his two sisters sitting on the ground. And so without any hesitation, he walks over to Marina, the older one, the 18-year-old, and he begins hitting her on the top of the head until she slouches over onto the ground motionless. And then he turns to the younger one, Petra, the 15-year-old, and he does the same thing to her until she's laying on the ground motionless. After this, Frank stands up and he leaves the living room and goes into the kitchen, where he retrieves a small knife, pruning shears, and a hammer. At this point, it's likely that one or two of the Alexander women were still alive. And so Frank, he comes back into the living room with these tools in hand, and with the organs blaring in the background, he begins to systematically hack off the breasts and genitals of his two sisters and his mother. And apparently this was a very slow and physically difficult task, and so he and his father Harold began switching off. One person would be on the organs while the other was mutilating, and they would switch back and forth until all of the offending parts on these three women had been removed and nailed to the wall. The last mutilation this father and son committed was to cut the heart out of the mother, Dragma, and they wrapped it up in a cord and then nailed this cord to the wall as well. Then, with the three Alexander women either dead or close to death, the father and son began running around the apartment, yelling and singing and rejoicing. They were extremely proud of what they had just done. Later that night, they left the apartment and slept in another property
Dude, that's fucked up. That's beyond fucked up. Dude, that's fucked up. That's beyond fucked up. This is way worse than the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now we did Texas Chainsaw Massacre killed his family. Even the little one that, the last one, the remake of not the one that came out last year. That one really sucks. The one from the 2006 one or something like that. The 2008. That one. That one person that was that little boy that was helping. No, that one person that was that little boy that was helping them escape. That helped her escape or something. You didn't kill him. You didn't kill him. What the fuck is that? That's that. What the fuck is that? Guys, like looking at you like bitch, fuck you. Guys, like looking at you like bitch, fuck you. Just you're going to hell. You all know he's still going to hell for that. I'm a Catholic. I don't give a damn. I would never do. I'm a Catholic, and I don't. In general, I would never do that to my children. Fuck that. I won't do it in general. Unless someone's trying to kill me, I'd kill them before they try to kill me. I'm a real bitch. I don't give a damn. I will hurt them. If there was like someone trying to hurt me. Screw that. I shot the big motherfucker. I'll kill you. Fuck you. This is fucked wrong with you. This is. That's fucked up right there. For so many times, but that is fucked up right there. I'm sorry I've seen that F for so many times, but that is fucked up right there. Don't do that to a woman. Don't do that to a woman. You don't judge anyone in general.
And then the following day, December 22nd, they went to the doctor's villa to tell Sabine the good news. And so they knock on the door, the doctor answers, he goes back and gets Sabine. Sabine wakes up, and Harold, her father, says to her, Sabine, we wanted to tell you right away that Frank and I have just finished killing your mother and your sisters. To which Sabine walks up to him, takes her father's hand, presses it to her cheek, and says, I'm sure you did what was necessary. This, of course, is what the doctor saw and overheard that was so horrible and prompted him to call the police. It was also the moment when he realized that was not mud all over these two men. That was their family members' blood. Psychiatrists would ultimately determine that Frank and Harold were not mentally fit to stand trial, and so they were both committed to an asylum for the criminally insane. Both men never showed any remorse or regret about what they had done. In fact, they continued to justify their actions by saying, because of them, these three women got to go to heaven. As for the one surviving daughter, Sabine, she pleaded with authorities to let her go live with her brother and her father in this asylum, but they rejected this request and sent her to live in a convent, which is a building that nuns live in, and no one really knows what happened to her after that. Shockingly, in 1990, so roughly 20 years after Frank and Harold were put into this asylum, they managed to escape, and they were never caught. To this day, their whereabouts remain unknown. So that's going to do it, guys. If you got something out of today's episode and you haven't done this already, please sneak into the Like Button's house and steal the glass plate inside of their microwave.
Okay. I think that's... Okay. If I could at least know how they look like now, I'll grab the motherfuckers, kill them. That was... Okay. I think that's okay. Yeah, done. Heaven probably. Well, I don't even know they are in shit. If I could at least know how they look like now, I'll grab the motherfuckers, kill them. That was... Go ahead and do it, or something like that. Yeah, done. Heaven probably. Well, I don't even know they are in shit. I don't even know they totally should be in heaven. I don't know. It depends. Because, like, I don't know if since they said they scared. I don't go ahead and do it or something like that. I felt bad for the people that live around the area where they escaped because they probably standing around around the... That is scary right there. Because Texas people don't fuck with that. That's scary. I don't... Well, not what they do, because there's so many fucking I felt bad for the people that live around the area where they escaped because they probably standing around, around there, or at least around the... You better not come to Texas, because Texas people don't fuck with that. Well, not what they do, because there's so many fucking people with guns that like shoot up schools, which is a dumbass idea. dumbest thing to do. They fucked up for doing that shit. It's so stupid. Hate people do this. They just go fuck themselves and die. I don't give a flying fuck. They gonna fucking kill any child, or even teenagers, college students, all fucked up like there. Like what they do, or even the people in general, like people, the innocent people, there's so many innocent people in this world, and so many bad people in this world. Like, you can't ever tell which one's innocent, which one's bad.
They did something.
It's fucked up. It pisses me off.
I was very uncomfortable.
I hope it's have a good day today because this is kind of ruined my day right here, doing this.
Yeah.
I did not know it would be that horrible. I thought it would be like they did something completely different, not maybe close to this. I was very uncomfortable hearing this.
Not to the part as a laugh.
And yeah.
He told it really good and all.
I hope you all like this video because
shouts to him for doing this really good.
I sure didn't. I liked it. I don't want to say this. I don't want to say I liked this video, but
no.
I say I liked this video, but not to the point. I like what they did. He told it really good and all and stuff. Shouts out to him for doing this really good because
girls went to hell about anything. Just doing what they did.
No. Yeah. Hope everybody have a good day today, and please comment and like and subscribe after you sign up get this video because I just went to hell watching this. I know even the girls who went to hell about anything, went to hell just doing what they did to them. And I feel bad for anyone who watched this video because especially the females out there, I feel so bad for y'all for whoever watched it.